On a November night in 2012, in a giant tent erected on an empty lot along the Las Vegas Strip, a crowd of 300 people watched a 6-foot birthday cake get wheeled to the center of the dance floor. An indoor Ferris wheel spun overhead. Circus performers worked the room. Every guest had signed a non-disclosure agreement before entering. The top of the cake burst open. Britney Spears climbed out and sang "Happy Birthday." Swizz Beatz, husband of Alicia Keys, one of the highest paid music producers on earth, collected $800,000 for the night's work. The party itself, later described by Las Vegas insiders as the most expensive private event the city had ever hosted, was paid for using money stolen from one of the poorest populations in Southeast Asia. The birthday boy was a chubby, mild-mannered 31-year-old from Penang, Malaysia, with rimless glasses and no official job title. His name was Low Tak Joe. Everyone called him Joe Low. And by that November night, using a fund called 1MDB, he had already stolen more than $1 billion from the Malaysian people. He was only getting started. To understand how Joe Low pulled off the largest financial heist in modern history, you need to understand one thing about him first. He was not actually rich. His father, Larry Low, had made a comfortable fortune through a garment manufacturing business in Penang. The family was wealthy by local standards, but when 16-year-old Joe Low arrived at Harrow School in London in 1998, one of Britain's most elite boarding schools, alma mater of Winston Churchill and Jawaharlal Nehru, he encountered something that would define the rest of his life: the gap. Harrow in the late 1990s was full of children of Gulf royalty, Southeast Asian political dynasties, and billionaires from across Asia. Compared to them, the Low family's Penang garment money was nothing. And Joe Low, according to journalists Tom Wright and Bradley Hope, who later wrote the definitive account of his story, felt that gap acutely. So he lied. When his Harrow classmates visited him in Penang, he arranged to borrow a yacht and an estate from a local billionaire, a friend of his father's. He replaced the owner's family photographs with his own. He let his friends assume it all belonged to him. They started calling him the Prince of Malaysia. He didn't correct them. That performance, the borrowed mansion, the swapped photographs, the manufactured identity, is the template for everything that followed. Not sophisticated financial engineering, not brilliance. A boy from Penang desperately performing wealth he didn't have, and discovering that if you do it confidently enough, people will believe you. At Harrow, he befriended a young man named Riza Aziz. Riza Aziz was the stepson of a Malaysian politician named Najib Razak. That friendship was worth $4.5 billion. After Harrow, Low enrolled at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, the world's first and arguably most prestigious business school. He was not there to study, he was there to network. According to Wright and Hope, Low's academic approach at Wharton was pragmatic. He was a quick study with a strong memory, but his real focus was building a contact book. He hosted parties, lavish ones. For his 20th birthday, he rented out Shampoo, one of Philadelphia's hottest clubs, for $40,000. He had his name printed in large letters on the party flyers. He sent a note to Ivanka Trump about a gambling trip to Atlantic City. Everything was a performance designed to project one thing: this man has money, and he can make you richer. After graduating in 2005, Low went to work turning those contacts into transactions. He helped connect Kuwait Finance House with an $87 million luxury apartment deal in Kuala Lumpur. He began managing money for friends and family. He made himself useful to Gulf sovereign wealth funds looking for Malaysian deal flow. None of it was enough. What Low needed was not clients. He needed a vault, an unlimited one, backed by a government with no real oversight. In 2009, Najib Razak, the stepfather of Low's old Harrow friend Riza Aziz, became Prime Minister of Malaysia, and he needed a fund, One Malaysia Development Berhad, 1MDB. Najib announced it in 2009 as a sovereign wealth fund, a government-owned investment vehicle that would make strategic investments to develop Malaysia's economy, fund infrastructure, create jobs, and lift a nation. It was seeded with $1 billion in government capital. Najib held sole authority to sign off on investments and manage personnel. His advisory board president, a man with no official role, no government position, and no public mandate, was Joe Low. This is the part that requires a moment a privately operating financier in his late 20s with no formal position, effectively ran a billion-dollar sovereign wealth fund for one of Southeast Asia's most populous nations. He had been given this access not through expertise, not through election, but because he had gone to school with the Prime Minister's stepson and made himself useful as a social fixer. The Malaysian people had no idea he existed. Between 2009 and 2014, 1MDB raised money through 3 major bond offerings, underwritten by Goldman Sachs, worth a combined $6.5 billion. The stated purpose was national development, power plants, a new financial district in Kuala Lumpur, economic partnerships with the Gulf. Of that $6.5 billion, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, approximately $4.5 billion was stolen. It was, the DOJ would later declare, the largest case in the history of its kleptocracy asset recovery initiative. Here is how you steal $4.5 billion from a sovereign wealth fund. You need a bank willing to raise the money without asking too many questions about where it's going. Goldman Sachs charged approximately $600 million in fees to underwrite 1MDB's 3 bond offerings, codenamed internally as Project Magnolia, Project Maximus, and Project Catalyze. To put that number in context, the typical fee for underwriting a sovereign bond is around 1% of the offering. Goldman charged between 9% and 11%. The excess fees were, prosecutors later alleged, partly the price of keeping quiet. Goldman's Southeast Asia chairman, Tim Leissner, was the architect of the bank's relationship with 1MDB. He worked directly with Low to secure the deals. Low and Leissner, according to the DOJ, paid approximately $1.6 billion in bribes to Malaysian and Abu Dhabi officials to ensure the bond mandates went to Goldman. Over 30 Goldman executives and supervisors were involved with 1MDB in some capacity. Multiple red flags were raised internally. When Low had earlier tried to open a personal account at Goldman, it had been denied because he couldn't adequately explain the origin of his wealth. Goldman then helped him raise $6.5 billion for a government fund he informally controlled. The bank agreed in 2020 to pay $3.9 billion to the Malaysian government to settle criminal proceedings, at the time one of the largest corporate penalties in Wall Street history. It also agreed to disgorge the entire $600 million in fees. Tim Leissner pleaded guilty to bribery and money laundering and, in 2025, was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. His co-conspirator Roger Ng received 10 years. Joe Low, who the DOJ described as the mastermind, received nothing, because Joe Low was already gone. What do you buy when you have stolen $4.5 billion? Joe Low's answer to this question was so comprehensive, so cinematic, so astronomically wasteful that it deserves its own chapter. Start with the real estate. The DOJ traced $100 million from 1MDB bond, proceeds to the purchase of properties in Hollywood Hills and Beverly Hills. Another $40 million went to apartments in New York. He acquired a $660 million stake in the Park Lane Hotel in Manhattan, partnering with established U.S. real estate firms who apparently did not look too closely at where his money came from. Then the art. He bought works by Monet, Van Gogh, Picasso, Matisse, Miro, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Andy Warhol. Between 2013 and 2014 alone, he spent approximately $200 million on art and jewelry. There was a $50 million Bombardier Global 5000 private jet, and then there was the Equanimity. $250 million, 300 feet long, helicopter landing pad, cinema, gymnasium, sauna, steam room, plunge pool. Low bought it using a $250 million loan from Deutsche Bank. He was later sued for failing to disclose that the loan was backed by stolen funds. Deutsche Bank settled for an undisclosed sum. But the spending was never just about consumption. It was, as it had always been with Low, about performance. Every bottle of Cristal, every supermodel at every party, every canvas by a dead master. It was evidence. Evidence that the man from Penang with the rimless glasses really was who he said he was. For Miranda Kerr, whom he courted while she was recently divorced, and he had a long-term girlfriend back in Malaysia, a $1.29 million heart-shaped diamond necklace for Valentine's Day, a $1.98 million matching diamond jewelry set aboard the Equanimity, $170,000 clear acrylic grand piano delivered to her house in Malibu, which she showed off in a video for Vogue magazine. For Paris Hilton, whom he had admired since college, $250,000 in gambling chips for her birthday in Las Vegas, and $100,000 per party appearance. For himself, the Vegas party, the Ferris wheel, the ice bar, Britney Spears. The bill for that single night, all of it traceable, according to investigators, back to the one MDB bond proceeds, was paid while Malaysian schoolchildren sat in classrooms whose infrastructure the fund was supposed to be building. In 2010, Riza Aziz, the Prime Minister's stepson, Joe Lo's old Harrow friend, co-founded a Hollywood production company. It was called Red Granite Pictures. Red Granite's first major project was a film about a man who stole money, threw orgies, and bought yachts, and who became beloved by the very culture he was defrauding. The film was The Wolf of Wall Street. The DOJ later alleged that approximately $100 million in funds diverted from one MDB flowed into Red Granite and helped finance the production. The movie was directed by Martin Scorsese, starred Leonardo DiCaprio as convicted fraudster Jordan Belfort, and grossed over $392 million worldwide. DiCaprio thanked Joe Lo by name at the Golden Globes when he won Best Actor in a Comedy. Joey, Riz, and Joe, thank you for being not only collaborators, but for taking a risk on this movie. At the time of that speech, Joe Lo had allegedly stolen more than $1 billion from the Malaysian people and was using the proceeds to cement his place in the Hollywood ecosystem he'd been chasing since college. The irony is so precise it barely needs stating. A film about the seductive corruption of Wall Street, financed by the proceeds of a real-world financial crime, celebrated with a thank you speech broadcast to a global audience by one of the world's most famous actors. Red Granite also used one MDB funds to produce Dumb and Dumber 2 and Daddy's Home. By 2017, the DOJ had seized royalties from all three films. Red Granite ultimately paid $60 million to the US government to settle its case. DiCaprio returned a $9.2 million Basquiat and a $750,000 Diane Arbus photograph, both given to him as gifts by Red Granite after the government moved to seize them. Miranda Kerr surrendered her $8 million in jewelry. Jordan Belfort, the real-world fraudster the film was based on, also attended Joe Lo's parties. He is not known to have returned anything. In 2015, a blogger named Claire Rucastle Brown, a British journalist living in Sarawak who ran a news portal called Sarawak Report, published a series of documents. They showed that nearly $700 million from one MDB had been deposited directly into Najib Razak's personal bank accounts. The Wall Street Journal followed. The DOJ opened an investigation. Malaysia's own Public Accounts Committee began asking questions before Najib's government dissolved the committee. The Malaysian Attorney General, appointed by Najib, declared in 2016 that no crime had been committed. 6 weeks later, Najib transferred the investigators running the case, fired his deputy prime minister who had publicly questioned one MDB, and enacted laws that made reporting on the case a crime. Joe Lo, who had been warned by Najib's team that parliamentary scrutiny was coming, had already left Malaysia. He would not return. In 2018, the Malaysian election produced a political earthquake. 93-year-old former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad came out of retirement to run against Najib on an anti-corruption platform. He won. Within days, police raided residences linked to the Najib family. What they found included 12,000 pieces of jewelry, 567 handbags, including 272 Hermes Birkins, 423 watches, 234 pairs of sunglasses, and approximately $28 million in cash stored in boxes. Najib's wife, Rosma Mansour, became a subject of separate criminal investigations. Najib was arrested, charged, tried. In 2022, he began serving a 12-year sentence, Malaysia's first former prime minister to go to prison. In December 2025, a Malaysian court found him guilty on a further 25 counts of abuse of power and money laundering related to the main one MDB case, and sentenced him to an additional 15 years, with a fine of $3.3 billion. Joe Lo, the man the court identified as Najib's proxy, conduit, intermediary, and facilitator, was not in the courtroom. He has never been in any courtroom. Lo's response to the global investigation against him has been, in keeping with his entire career, a performance. He has maintained his innocence publicly and consistently. He has described the charges against him as political reprisal by the Mahathir government. He has said the allegations constitute a campaign of harassment. He has pointed to his cooperation offers, his civil settlements, and his family's asset forfeitures as evidence of good faith. In October 2019, he reached a global civil settlement with the US government, forfeiting assets, including a $120 million yacht, and agreeing to surrender more than $1 billion in assets worldwide. The criminal charges, money laundering, bribery, conspiracy, were explicitly preserved. In June 2024, he agreed to forfeit a further $100 million in assets, a luxury Paris apartment, a Monet, and Andy Warhol. He has now forfeited in excess of $1.2 billion to the US government, and yet he remains free. Interpol issued a red notice in 2018. Malaysia revoked his passport the same year. Cyprus and St. Kitts and Nevis, two nations where he had quietly purchased citizenship, revoked those citizenships under pressure. According to investigative journalists Bradley Hope and Tom Wright, as of July 2025, Low is living in the Green Hills neighborhood of Shanghai, moving between Macau, Hong Kong, and mainland China, with what multiple sources describe as protection from the Chinese government. He reportedly carries a forged Australian passport under the name Vase Konstantinos Achilles. He travels with 7 or 8 phones, sending messages, his associates say, like he's playing a piano. The Chinese government denies harboring him. He was allegedly filmed at Shanghai Disneyland on Christmas Eve 2019 by a witness with a cell phone. Step back from the parties and the diamonds and the Basquiats for a moment, because the $4.5 billion that Jho Low stole was not abstract money. It was sovereign debt that Malaysia is still repaying. By 2020, 1MDB's outstanding obligations were estimated at $7.8 billion. The Malaysian government absorbed those debts, which means they are being repaid by Malaysian taxpayers, in a country where the GDP per capita at the time of the theft was around $10,000 a year. The fund was created to build infrastructure, to develop an economy, to close a development gap between Malaysia and the world's wealthier nations. Instead, it built Jho Low's reputation. Goldman Sachs paid $3.9 billion. JP Morgan paid $330 million in 2025 to settle its own 1MDB-related exposure. DBS Bank, BSI, UBS, and Falcon Bank in Singapore and Switzerland all faced penalties or had operating licenses revoked. Of the $4.5 billion, the US government had recovered and returned approximately $1.4 billion to Malaysia by 2024. The hunt for the rest continues. The Wolf of Wall Street, the movie 1MDB financed, won 5 Academy Award nominations and became a cultural phenomenon celebrating a particular kind of financial transgressor. Charming, reckless, untouchable. Jordan Belfort, the man it portrayed, served 22 months in prison. Najib Razak, the prime minister who gave Low the keys, is serving what will amount to decades. Tim Leissner, the Goldman banker who built the mechanism, is serving 2 years. And Jho Low, the 43-year-old boy from Penang who once swapped photographs in a borrowed mansion to convince his friends he was rich, is, as best anyone can determine, eating dinner in Shanghai, with 8 phones on the table. In 2014, Leonardo DiCaprio stood at a podium in Beverly Hills and thanked Jho Low by name in front of the entire global entertainment industry. He was thanking a man who had used a Malaysian government development fund to finance a film about financial crime. Nobody in that room knew. That is the thing about Jho Low that is hardest to process. Not the scale of the theft, not the audacity of the spending, not even the impunity he continues to enjoy. It's that it worked. He attended Harrow. He graduated Wharton. He befriended a future prime minister's stepson. He got inside Goldman Sachs. He produced an Oscar-nominated film. He dated a Victoria's Secret model. He had Britney Spears jump out of a cake. None of it was real. All of it required stolen money to sustain. All of it was the same borrowed mansion, the same swapped photographs, the same boy from Penang performing a life he needed everyone to believe in. The difference between 1998 and 2013 was just the size of the loan. In 1998, he borrowed a yacht from a billionaire to impress his friends. In 2012, he borrowed $4.5 billion from the Malaysian people to impress everyone else. Somewhere in Shanghai, the performance is still running.